Yes.
Welcome back. I'm Stacey Delicat. Thanks so much for being with us this afternoon. I am joined this afternoon by criminal defense attorney and law and crime trial analyst Julie Rendelman. Thanks so much for being here, Julie.
Thank you.
We have a lot to talk about today, and we're going to run down a few trials that we've been covering and also talk about some sort of hot legal topics in the news. But first, let's talk about that big trial that we've been covering here on Law and Crime all week, and that is the murder trial of former U.S. Marine Jason Riley King. You may recall he is charged with murder in the DUI crash that killed 2 UC San Diego medical students. Now, the trial is on recess today and will be on recess on Monday as well for the Martin Luther King holiday, but then it will resume on Tuesday. So this afternoon, we're going to recount some of the key points of the trial thus far. But first, I want to switch gears a little bit, Julie, and let's talk about Bill Cosby. Remember him? It's been a few months. Right, vaguely. We all he's been out of the headlines a few months, right? It was June that his sexual assault trial ended in a mistrial, and his next trial is not going to start until April 2nd. He's accused, you may recall, of drugging and assaulting Andrea Constant, a Temple University staff member. Well, now he has a new team of defense attorneys headed by Tom Mesereau. That is the attorney who successfully defended Michael Jackson against child molestation charges. Well, so he's got a few months to go until his next trial, right, Julie? But this week, Wednesday night, he went to a restaurant in his hometown of Philadelphia, and he went out with a friend, and your hometown as well, okay? And he, the publicist invited along some reporters to tag along for this dinner at the restaurant in Philadelphia. First of all, is that strange to you at all that it almost seems like, okay, he's coming out, they're inviting the press, like a little bit of a publicity tour as we lead up to the trial?
By the way, I guess the best answer is nothing's unusual anymore with him in terms of kind of where he was and where he is now. I'm not really sure how this publicity tour is going to help him, just because he is not at this stage the most endeared, especially to those who are reporting on him. So I don't think he should be left to his own devices as to what he's going to say, and clearly what he said was not something that the community at large wants to hear.
Exactly. First, I just want to tell you he was at Ristorante La Veranda. I don't know if you know that restaurant since you said you're from Philly. But
he actually, his old home is right near my family's home.
So everything apparently was going well according to an AP report filed by one of the reporters there. He was chatting with friends, fellow diners were coming up to say something to him, and then he shook hands with a reporter and made a request. He said, "Please don't put me on Me Too." Now, first and foremost, that seems like something he probably would not want to say.
Right, right. No, I mean, look, it's a foolish thing to say. Quite honestly, I don't know why they have the reporters there. I don't know how this gets him to where he wants to go. If I were him, I'd be laying so low right now, especially knowing that his trial's coming up, especially knowing what's going on with the Me Too and Time's Up, movements right now. I would be as quiet under the radar as humanly possible, but that never seems to be the way he goes.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question now, is that things have changed a lot since his last trial last spring, because we've had this this surge of women coming forward, this Me Too movement, Hollywood standing together, women in all different industries, obviously the Harvey Weinstein takedown, and we've seen the takedown of so many other men in the entertainment industry.
Right.
When Cosby was on trial and all of his accusers were coming forward, for many years, there didn't seem to be this momentum behind believing the victims, standing with the female victims. And now we're really in the middle of this moment, a lot of people would say, in culture, in our American culture here. Will that play a role in this trial? Does that change things?
Look, I might be taking the differing view than others. I think a lot of people think it will make a difference. I think one of the things unique about Bill Cosby versus, any of the other people that we're talking about is that there was momentum when Bill Cosby was accused. When accusers started coming forward left and right, everyone stopped backing him up. And so that momentum, I think, in many ways started with him. And so I don't know that this movement is necessarily going to change kind of the dynamic of what's going to occur within this specific case. And I say that because the facts of this specific case are unique to this case. And the defense, the prosecution has issues with regards to some of the dynamics with regards to Cosby and the complainant. And those are going to exist no matter what the movement is, no matter what's going on. And I think as long as the defense chooses a jury that is going to follow the law and just based on the evidence, I don't think it's going to have any play whatsoever in regards to what happens. And it shouldn't.
will it make it harder to select a jury? Because you bring that up, and I know some attorneys that were quoted in this AP story by the reporter who he made the comment to about Me Too said that jury selection will be key in this, because first of all, the defense is probably going to be extra weary of people who are sympathetic with this movement, who stand with this Me Too movement, who maybe identify themselves as feminists. But on the other hand, there's also this sort of backlash to that, where there are some men who think, you know what, this is unfair to men, it's going too far, and I'm going to stand on the other side of the Me Too movement.
And by the way, there's some women, I think, that also fall into that category who sometimes might feel that there's enough in terms of that, you know. So again, I think it, of course, is going to be hard to pick a jury. Before this movement, it was hard to pick a jury, so hard that they had to move it to Pittsburgh, because they knew that in Philadelphia, although I don't really think it made a difference whether it was Philadelphia or anywhere, because everyone knows about the Bill Cosby case and knows about all these accusers coming forward. So yeah, I think it's going to be very difficult to pick a fair and impartial jury. There's not going to be a juror in sight that doesn't know what's going on with Bill Cosby, hasn't heard the negative stories, and hasn't heard about what's going on in the Me Too movement. It's whether or not they can separate that and make their decision just based on the facts.
And we don't know yet whether his attorneys will request to move the trial again, but they did say we're probably going to do things differently. It seems like, to your point, there's not really a reason to move the jury, because everyone in America knows Bill Cosby. Everyone knows what's going on with the Me Too movement and has heard about the accusations against him. So if you were his attorney, I mean, would you file to move the trial?
I don't know. You know, look, I mean, some people in Philadelphia, he's beloved still. And so there might be an argument to be made that staying in his kind of hometown might be a positive thing for him. I don't know. I think one of the things that when you have a new defense attorney on a case and the original case ended a hung jury, sometimes you have to think, don't fix that of which isn't broken. And so when you walk away with a hung jury on this type of case, you want to walk away with either an acquittal or a hung jury. Either one of them is a victory for the defense. So you want to make sure that your strategy is not so afield of what the old strategy was that you find the jury going against you.
Let's just go back for 1 second to these remarks he made to the reporter on Wednesday night. Don't put me under the Me Too movement. Well, it's not clear if that was kind of a joke because he is a comedian or not. I will say that Andrea Constand's lawyer said she was floored to hear about the comment. She said, apparently Mr. Cosby still believes sexual assault is a laughing matter. You have to hope he's alone in that opinion. When he makes an off-the-cuff comment like that, does something like that, even go to further impact people's views of him?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, the fact that we're talking about it and that it's written about, and the fact that people are so floored that he would still be so foolish as to bring that up makes absolutely no sense. And of course, once again, it's bad enough that everyone knows about not just the allegations of this complainant, but the millions of people, and I'm exaggerating, but all the people that have come forward to voice their complaints against him in regards to what has gone on for years. It certainly doesn't help him in any way, nor, quite honestly, does that statement even make any sense, because I don't even know what that means. I don't know that anyone really knows what that means when he's saying it.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of months leading up to the trial. I had mentioned to you before off camera, after I read this story, I said, what's even going on with Cosby? I looked him up and I see that someone, presumably his publicists, have been running his Twitter account, putting out messages, happy holidays to you and your family and so forth, sort of acting as if nothing's going on. So I'm wondering that, and the fact that he's going out to this restaurant and inviting reporters, whether they're really making a concerted effort to sort of polish his image before the trial. But it'll be something to keep an eye on to see whether we see more of him before that April retrial begins.
Yeah, if I was his attorneys, I would not be seeing more of him. I mean, that I would honestly, the case has its issues, and I would let the case speak for itself. And in terms of him, I wouldn't want him talking to anybody about anything unless this trial and until this trial starts.
One more question for you. When we have a high-profile attorney coming into a case like this one, he obviously, changed teams after the mistrial. When we have this attorney coming in who represented Michael Jackson, who's perhaps very well known, how does that change things? Does it change things?
I think it can be a good thing. I think it can be a bad thing. I mean, again, it's all about the jury, and it's all about connecting with the jury. Being a popular attorney can be effective if the jury likes you. There are attorneys out there that people don't like, so the fact that they're popular doesn't necessarily behoove them. Again, as long as he has a strategy, this is going to come down to jury selection. It's going to come down to the cross-examination of the complainant. And remember, when you're cross-examining a woman who is accusing an individual of a sexual crime, you have to be very careful, because you have to make sure that the jury understands that you gotta cross-examine aggressively but not offensively. And so I don't care if you're famous or not, you better do it right or the jury's not going to like you.
Absolutely, makes sense. All right, well, let's move back to the Jason Riley King trial for a moment. As I mentioned, this is a trial we've been covering here at Law and Crime all week. Got underway this week. It is the trial of a former U.S. Marine who was charged with murder in the DUI crash that killed two UC San Diego medical students a couple of years ago. We heard open arguments this week as well, opening arguments rather, as well as some pretty interesting witnesses on the stand. But before we get to some of that testimony, obviously what makes this case so interesting, right, Julie, is that Jason Riley King isn't charged with manslaughter. Right. He's admitted that he was drunk and caused this accident. The prosecutors in this case are pursuing murder charges because they claim that he took a course 8 days before with the military in which he was informed about how dangerous drunk driving is, that he should have known better. But what are the prosecution's successes of winning on a murder charge, in your opinion?
It's funny because we were talking about this the other day and I didn't have the answer. I used to work in homicide, but we didn't do vehicular homicides for the most part. That was another unit. So I actually started looking to see how many times in New York, or how often it is, that they try manslaughter, vehicular manslaughter cases as murder. And there were more than I had expected. You know, in this case, one of the things that stands out in my mind when you try to differentiate between murder and manslaughter is it's not just that he was told about kind of the bad things that can happen, you know, when you get behind the wheel, because we all kind of know what's going to happen. We're all adults. When you get behind the wheel and you're drunk, something could potentially happen and a life can be taken. But he did more than that. He was told that day, after he'd been drinking, that he shouldn't get behind the wheel.
He was told by
on
people
numerous
at the bar,
occasions.
He was told by friends.
Correct.
And he did anyway. He said, I'm fine.
Exactly. And to add to that, what indicates just how blatantly drunk he was is he drove down the wrong way down a street. And so it's not just someone behind the wheel who you know, is driving at a slow rate of speed and, you know, hit someone and they're not badly injured. It is someone who did, on every step of the way, completely ignored the potential that someone would die. And that's why you start to wonder, well, is there room for murder? And you think, I think there's a possibility that there is.
It's interesting what you say, that you spoke to colleagues of yours who said, actually, you know, there are cases when DUIs are tried as murder, because this sounds so unusual to a lot of people,
right,
who are familiar or know people maybe who've been convicted of DUIs, hopefully not fatal ones. But I want to go to a clip rather from the trial this week, in which we heard an audio recording played from when Jason Riley King was brought to the hospital and interviewed by detectives. He too was injured in the crash, and he was brought there. Officers measured his blood alcohol level to be 0.14, which is 2 times the legal limit of the state's DUI blood alcohol level, rather. So let's take a listen to this clip, and you can sort of hear he slurs. He's clearly not in a good state of mind, let's say, when they talk to him in the hospital.
Alan lived at. We might need to get a hold of him. 32nd Street?
Well, Miramar.
He lives on Miramar?
Yes.
And where do you live at?
Also live on base, sir.
You live on base?
Sir.
Is that Miramar?
Sir.
Do you remember anything about the name of the place that you were at before you got in your truck? You don't? Are you trying to tell me that you're so intoxicated you don't even know where you were coming from? Or do you know? You remember what it looked like? What it was maybe close to? Sir, I'm going to need you to pay attention. This is important. Oh, okay. Can you tell me how you got there? What road you took? What was that?
I remember where, like, off the top of my head, what road I took to get there.
Okay. Do you know the phone number for anybody that you were with tonight that I could call that maybe could figure that out?
Let me just sign one more.
Is your girlfriend there or anything like that?
Was there?
Okay. So Alan, that's all you know, is he Alan Slang, you don't know his phone number? Okay. So, did you take a freeway to get to this part? Okay. Do you remember which freeway you took to get to the bar? Well, there's Interstate 8 that goes to the beach, and there's 5 that also goes to the beach. How about this? Did you pay in a parking? Did you park in a parking lot where you had to pay somebody to put your truck? No? Okay, did you park on the street? Okay. Did you get to park near where the bar was at or far away? Okay.
Along the street.
You parked on the street?
Sir.
Did you have to put money in the meter? Do you know what time you got to the bar? Was it at midnight? Or earlier?
Detroit, midnight.
Do you remember what you were drinking?
I think I had a couple. Well, like platinums.
Were those the ones in the metal can?
No, sir.
Were they in a pint glass?
Wow.
A glass bottle?
Sir.
Okay. And when you say a couple, do you know how many? All right, sir. Do you feel the effects of the alcohol?
Yes, sir.
All right. In what way? Okay. Is the room spinning? Okay, so you're not so bad that the room is spinning when you close your eyes? Okay. Did you have any mixed drinks? And do you know if you were in Ocean Beach, Mission Beach, or Pacific Beach? In between Mission and Pacific.
Sir.
Is it on that main, was the bar on that main strip where all the bars are at? On Mission Boulevard there? Was it close to the roller coaster? You don't remember seeing the roller coaster? Okay. Did you have any mixed drinks? No? Any shots? You using any drugs tonight? Alright. You taking medicine?
No, sir.
You're not taking anything for pain before the crash? Okay, so did you have anything wrong with you before you had this crash? No? Okay. Do you have diabetes? But you don't have it? Okay. How about epilepsy?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you have seizures?
No, sir.
Do you have a tendency to pass out while you're driving?
No, sir.
Walking?
No, sir.
Okay. You ever been in an accident before?
Yes, sir.
When was that?
Long time ago.
How long
I
ago?
don't really remember it, but my mom tells me I've been in an accident.
Have you ever been in an accident where you were driving the car?
No, sir.
Okay. Not even like a little bump?
No, sir.
Do you know what kind of a truck that you were driving when you had your crash tonight?
Night.
This morning? Early morning?
350.
And how long have you had that truck?
Not too long. A couple days.
A couple days?
Yes, sir.
Well, where'd you buy that thing?
Bought it from someone I know on Craigslist.
Is there anything wrong with the truck?
No, sir. Nothing on that.
How about the brakes on it? Are they good?
Sure. Brakes are good.
Okay. Does it steer okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Does the gas work on it all right?
Yes, sir.
Were you wearing your seatbelt?
Yes, sir.
Did the owner of the truck, when you bought it from him, say anything about the truck you need to be careful of?
Yes, sir.
Like, hey, watch out, it has trouble with this, or it has trouble with that, or it starts up okay?
Yes, sir.
Do you know if you had a full tank of gas in it when you crashed?
A little bit under full. But always make sure it's full.
How much money does it cost to fill that thing up?
The lift pump's going out on it, so I can't go under. So, what it was about $30.
Okay. Did you put gas in it before you went out?
Sir.
Or where was that at?
Nice.
You know what time you left to go out? Can you give me a rough idea? Like, was it noon yesterday? Okay.
It's like late yesterday.
After dinner or before? Yeah, after dinner. Okay, so you put gas in it. You went out after dinner. Who did you meet when you went out?
Check that wreck with.
The what?
Check that fucking accident with.
What about that truck? Maybe you misunderstood what I said. Who did you meet when you went out to the bar?
I'm not making some. Ow.
You said that you met up with one of your friends down there, with a group of friends.
Oh, that was when we were hanging out down there.
Okay.
But we were parked. We were driving out.
Right. But when you went out and you met up with your friends when you were hanging out, who were you hanging out with?
Slang?
Who is Slang? All right. Does he have a real name?
Alan?
Alan Slang?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You gave me that name before. Who else were you with?
Dylan Wolfrey?
Dylan Wolfrey?
Sir.
Okay. And who else was there?
Austin Perry?
Austin Perry?
Sir.
Okay. Who else, sir?
Connor Carrizales?
Connor Carrizales?
Sir.
Okay. Anybody else?
No, sir.
Any girls?
Sir.
All right. Who was buying the drinks?
We take turns, sir.
Who bought the last round?
I think I might have.
Okay. How were you paying for your drinks?
Card?
Do you know which card?
Like I got, sir.
You got a couple cards in there.
The Navy Fed, sir.
Your Navy Fed card. Okay. When you got into the bar, was there a bouncer at the door checking IDs?
Maybe, sir.
Was there any problems when you were in the bar?
No, sir.
No fights?
I think so, sir.
Nobody got thrown out?
Maybe my drunk ass did, sir.
Okay. Now, why did you get thrown out?
I don't know if I did, sir.
Oh, okay. So you're just theorizing. No, I just want to know. I don't want guesses from you. Okay. I want to be as accurate as I can. So I mean, I don't want you telling me you got thrown out of a bar when you didn't. So do you know if they made you leave?
Oh, really no, sir.
Do you remember if the bartender stopped giving you drinks?
I don't think so, sir.
Okay. Do you know how many beers you had? The whole night, start to finish.
The whole night.
Yep.
Probably had, I think, I saw myself off with 4 AMFs
Okay. What is that?
and audios, motherfucker. Not sure what's in it, sir.
Oh, those are like a shot or a mixture?
Kind of like a drink, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So wrong. 4 AMFs. How tall were they? Like in a shot glass or were they in a real glass?
Yes, sir. There's a real glass.
Okay. So you started off with 4 adios motherfuckers, and then after that, what'd you have? You want to stop talking? I'd like to get this information out of you now, real nice and quick, and get on out of here so I can quit bugging you. Alrighty. So 4 AMFs, and then what else, sir?
Probably had 2 more.
Okay. So 4 AMFs, and then 2 more.
We all just gonna start dancing on our own terms.
You were dancing?
Started drinking on our own terms. Started having some at our own pace. So probably had 3 more after that.
3 more AMFs of beer.
Yes, sir.
Alright. Now you said something about having some Bud Light Platinums or something like that?
Sir.
And how many of those?
Probably 2.
Okay. You feel pretty drunk right now?
Sure, sir.
Alright. Hey, when you got in your truck to drive, do you think that you should have been driving?
Do not, sir.
Okay, why not?
Intoxicated, sir.
Okay. Did anybody tell you you shouldn't drive?
A few people, sir.
Okay, who told you that?
My friends.
The ones that you were with?
Sir.
Why don't you give me some names, sir? Who told you not to drive?
I don't know if I know the names, but who told me not to drive, sir?
Okay, then why didn't you listen to them?
Ignorant, that's why, sir.
Did you have a cell phone on you that you could have used to call a taxi?
Yes, sir.
That's a yes, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you have money in the bank that you could have paid for a taxi with?
Yes, sir.
You ever used Uber before?
No, sir.
Alright. Did anybody offer to call you a cab?
I don't think so, sir.
Okay. So from where you were drinking, do you know what way you were supposed to take to get home?
I was like, left. Get on the highway and take another left.
Okay. Do you remember the crash happening?
No, sir.
Do you think you got knocked out?
Probably, sir.
Okay. Let's talk about this bar. Why is it? I know that you mentioned that they told you you shouldn't be driving because of you being drunk, but what were you doing that made them think that you were so drunk? Or that you were drunk?
No, sir.
Were you stumbling?
Probably, sir.
Well, you would know. Do you remember falling down?
Nah.
You remember walking into anybody?
No, sir.
Bumping into anyone?
I probably was, sir.
Inside the bar or outside?
Probably both.
Welcome back. I'm Stacey Delicat. If you're just joining us, we've been dipping into some parts of the Jason Riley King trial from earlier this week. The former U.S. Marine on trial for murder in California, charged in the DUI crash that killed 2 young University of California, San Diego medical students. And I have defense attorney Julie Rendelman and Law&Crime trial analyst with me to break this all down. I mentioned earlier the trial was on recess today, so that's why we're sort of analyzing what has happened thus far. It's going to resume on Tuesday. Tuesday. We were just listening to a clip from Officer Brad Clinkscales up on the stand playing audio of an interview that he did about 3:30 a.m. the morning, we should say the early morning of the crash. That was close to 2 hours after the accident. And at that point, King is still well above the legal drinking limit. We hear the officers ask him whether he's drunk. He is. Is the room spinning? He says it's not spinning too bad, but it's clear that he's drunk. In that audio, we can clearly hear that.
Right.
But let's go back to what we were discussing before,
Sure.
which is how unusual is it that prosecutors opted to bring a second-degree murder charge in this case?
And, you know, what I was saying to you when we weren't, on air was that when I first heard it, I was like, that's a little strange. And then when I started to think about it more and review the Murder 2 statute in California, it didn't seem so unusual to me. So, you know, and again, I only practice in New York. And so New York has Murder 2 statutes. They have, with Murder 2, they have intent to commit a crime where someone intentionally kills someone. And then they have what's called depraved indifference, where you basically don't intend to kill that person, but you have such a wanton disregard for the lives of others that your actions should be treated as though you intentionally meant to kill someone, which is why it allows it to be Murder 2. Well, in California, it's similar. And so in California, their Murder 2 statute talks about express malice and implied malice. And it seems to me where the DA's office or the prosecutor's office is going with this specific case is they're going with implied malice, which is not that he intended to kill someone, but that his actions implied that he knew that based on his actions, someone potentially was going to die. And they used the fact that he had just had these classes a short period of time before to strengthen their argument that his actions indicated and showed an implied malice.
Now, when we talk about those classes, which we've been talking about, he was a member of the U.S. Military Marines. They were required to take part in these seminars, let's call them for lack of a better word. This, in my understanding, was sort of a public safety course in which the topic and the dangers of DUI were discussed. The whole program was not just about DUI and the dangers of drunk driving, but this was a big topic. He had completed 2 of them, including one course 8 days before. Now, if the prosecution is building their case saying because he had taken these courses knowing the dangers of drunk driving, does that create a slippery slope? Because we've all at times, we could argue, been educated about the dangers of drunk driving, whether it's during your driver ed course, whether in high school, wherever it is. So does that open the door for anyone who has, who we know has been educated on the dangers of drunk driving to be charged with murder in a DUI crash?
Well, one could argue that he didn't need that course, and based on what he did that night, it rises to the level of Murder 2, even if we fall, even if we're looking at that specific statute of implied malice. Yeah, when we were in high school, we watched the shows where it showed what happens when you drink, and it showed the car accidents with the horrible, results that happen, and they were brutal. The one thing that sticks out in this case that's a little different than what we talked about when we looked in high school years ago is it had just happened. So he walks into this event with just hearing about what we heard about in high school again. And not only did he hear about it again, he heard about it just a few weeks ago. And also, and I don't want to reiterate this, but he had been told right before he gets in the car that this is not what you should be doing when you're driving. So when you start to add those things together, they are a little different than a scenario where you learned about driver's ed when you were in high school. And I think there's a way to distinguish them. So yeah, I hear you, and I think that there's a potential for it, but I think it's interesting how they're using what he learned about a few weeks before to kind of support their Murder 2 position.
So some of the testimony we've heard this week, in addition to detectives and officials and authorities, eyewitnesses, and also people who survived the crash, including a friend of the medical students, and I want to get to his clip in just a few minutes. But first, I'm wondering, as we look towards next week and what to expect in the trial next week, from your perspective as a defense attorney, would you think that King himself would take the stand, and if you were his attorney, would you advise him to or not?
I think it's always hard to make a decision when it comes to that, and I say it for 2 reasons. One is, I don't know how he's going to testify. I don't know him. And so usually a defense attorney has gotten to know him, gotten to know how well he's going to do on cross-examination. He's in a better position than any of us to make that decision. It also really depends on how strong the prosecution's case is at the end. You know, sometimes you don't make a decision whether to call your client until the very end. And sometimes it's on the night before that you even decide to do it. And so, yeah, you know, I think it really depends on how powerful the rest of the witnesses are. Remember, no matter how we look at it, 2 young women are dead, and I think everyone starts to lose focus of that. And that is something, as a defense attorney, you have to realize that the jury is thinking about that and thinking about the risks he took and the knowledge he had that ended these lives.
Absolutely. I mean, we have 2 young women, you know, right at the beginning of very promising careers, and we also have their friends who were in the car with them who have testified about all of the horrible effects that have come since the crash. The medical student that I want to play his audio from in a few minutes, he says, you know, he really, he had to take a break from medical school to recover. It's not just affected him physically, but mentally. It's affected his memory and so forth. And I'm wondering, when we hear testimony from surviving victims in cases like this, how strongly does that play with juries? You know, it's one thing to hear all of the information from the detectives and the officers and the people at the hospital, all of sort of the bullet points, nuts and bolts. But when we actually hear surviving victim testimony like that, how much of a part does it play?
I think you know, no one's made of stone, and so as a prosecutor, you always tell jurors, sympathy plays no role, and you can't let it play a role. And as a defense attorney, you say the same thing to them. But inevitably, jurors have emotions, and they can't help but have emotions. It's really a question, and again, this goes back to picking a jury, is making sure that that jury is really going to base their decision on the facts. But the facts are that this guy drove the wrong way down a street and killed innocent people, and did so with what we say is the knowledge that he shouldn't have. With that said, I think there's a lot of people out in the community that can say, I've made a mistake like that before. I've driven drunk before. I've driven with too much alcohol. You know, these decisions are made, and often they're not made where someone dies. And so I think a lot of people that are watching this have probably a lot of mixed emotions about what should happen in this case.
Well, let's go ahead and play the clip from Yuki Izuka, one of the surviving victims of the crash, and we can let our viewers decide for themselves how they sympathize with him.
Mr. Izuka, where do you work and go to school?
I am currently working at Scripps Mercy, and I go to school at UCSD.
What do you do at Scripps Mercy?
I am currently a medical student, and so I am helping out the team with patients there.
You also mentioned that at UCSD you're a medical student, is that correct?
Yes.
What year of medical school are you?
I'm currently a 3rd year.
So in your 3rd year, is it fair to say that you're doing like a practicum rotation?
Say that again?
Because you're in your 3rd year, are you doing like a rotation in hospitals? Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Mr. Izuka, you've had some medical issues in the last 2.5 years. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Do you remember anything about the night of May the 15th, 2015?
No.
What is the first memory that you have after that date?
The first memory, I guess I would say the first memory that I have would be being at the rehabilitation center and being lost and frustrated about the fact that I didn't know where my room was.
Now, since that memory of the rehabilitation center, is it fair to say that you've had memories, or you've been able to research kind of what happened to you from the night of May the 15th of 2015?
Wait, so what was the question? I'm not exactly sure.
Since the night of May the 15th, or into the early morning hours of May the 16th, 2015, is it fair to say that you've had the opportunity to go back and kind of piece together what happened?
Yes.
Before your first memory at the rehabilitation center?
Yes.
And how did you go about piecing that all together?
I spoke with family and friends to find out exactly what happened.
And did you learn, in speaking with people, that you stayed in a hospital?
Did I learn from the people that were in the hospital at the time?
Did you, at some point in time, did you learn that you'd had to stay in a hospital because of some injuries that you had?
Yes.
Do you know how long that you were there?
So I think I was specifically in the hospital for 1 month
What hospital were you in?
at UCSD.
And after you were at the UCSD hospital, where did you go to next?
I think I went to the rehabilitation center.
How long were you at the rehabilitation center?
I think it's approximately around 1 month.
Where did you go after that?
I believe that I went back home to my parents' house.
After your first memory in the rehabilitation center feeling lost, what's the next thing that you remember?
I guess the notable memory that I do have would be the sense of relief and joy of being able to see my room at my house, at my parents' house, would be the notable thing that sticks in my mind at this moment in time.
When you remember being in your room or seeing in your room, did the memories from there get a little bit clearer for you?
It certainly has gotten much clearer than those back in those days. But that being said, I do think that there's also, my memory just in general was very patchy at the time, so there may be some portions that seem much more clear to me than other portions that are completely deleted out of my mind.
Is it fair to say that you learned that you were in a car crash?
Yes.
Did you also have treatment for injuries from that car crash?
Yes, plenty.
What were the injuries that you had?
The injuries that I had a multitude of injuries. So the notable injury would be that my thigh bone, my femur, was snapped in half, and so they had to replace that. And then my hand, as you can see from my scars, that there are my hand was very debilitated, and they had to do surgeries for that to make sure that I still have a hand. Fortunately, I do have a hand. And then the other thing would be, I guess medically speaking, it's called homonymous hemianopia. But
Okay,
that being said,
I'm going to stop you there for a second. So, whenever you use any medical terms, you have the joy of spelling them for us so that the court reporter gets it right. So you used a term, it began with an H. Could you spell that for us, if you could?
Or I can just tell you exactly what it means, but either way, spelling homonymous hemianopia is HOMONYMOUS, and hemianopia is HEMINOPIA, and some people include hemianopsia or anopia. They're the synonyms, so it doesn't matter. So regardless, what does it all mean, right? So basically, that just means the fact that in both my eyes, I cannot see the left side of the world.
And was that injury as a result from a car crash?
Most certainly.
And how did that injury manifest itself? Was there an injury to your head or something like that? How did
Yes.
that come about?
So the other thing that I was going to follow up with is the fact that I had a traumatic brain injury. And that is the main reason why I have the homonymous hemianopia.
And so the traumatic brain injury, did you actually fracture your skull or
So,
what was it?
I think that there were some fractures and they had to readjust my eyes because I had some ocular abnormalities, and I had to do some surgeries for that as well. And so I definitely had some injuries with that. I don't know if there's any notable, I can't recall exactly, what kind of fracture there was specifically, but I do know that my brain was significantly injured from the accident.
Well, when you wash your hair, do you have any scars on your skull that you're not
Yes,
familiar with?
I do have scars on my skull. And granted, that being said, they might not be the most visible right now, but if you look in closer, it's definitely there.
And the scars that you had, were those a result of the crash, or did you have to have surgery to repair some of the damage?
I think they were from the crash, and then, yeah, so they were from the crash.
Now, when you were in hospital, is it fair to say that you have no recollection of that month that you were at UCSD?
Completely zero. Either way, I was comatose for I think around 2 weeks, so I would not have any recollection even if I wanted to. And then I was recovering from my comatose state, and I'm not going to have the cognitive ability to be able to remember anything at that moment in time either.
You mentioned also that there was some ocular damage, is that right?
Yes.
Did you have a broken orbital socket at all?
I think they had said something about that, and I had to get some surgeries to basically adjust for that. But I'm not entirely sure exactly the details behind how the ocular surgeries, I think they had said something about how my eyes were misaligned, and so I had to get some surgery for that.
And was all of that happening in that 1 month that you were at the hospital?
I don't think so, but I think some of the surgeries, like the ocular misalignment one, may have been a little later. I can't recall exactly when it was, but yeah, but it should have been after being in the hospital comatose.
So, after the time spent in the hospital, then you go to the rehabilitation center, then you get home. Have you had any surgery since the time that you were actually released from the rehabilitation center?
So again, this is because of the fact that I have terrible memory around that time, just in general. But I thought that I had some procedures done for the ocular misalignment and hand surgeries. I think were a little bit later after being discharged, but I don't know exactly when.
So when you were talking about your hand, you were holding up your left hand, is that right?
Yes.
And your left hand has some scars on it, is that fair to say?
Yes.
I'm sorry, sir, could you show me that? Thank you.
And the scars on your hand, you didn't have those before the night of May the 15th,
That is definitely true.
And do you remember having surgery on your hand or no?
So I guess I can't remember exact details behind the surgery. Yeah, sorry.
And do you remember your hand ever having to be in a cast or having pins in it or anything like that?
I definitely don't remember, I guess, like notable casts, but I do remember the fact that I had to do a lot of physical therapy for it.
So at some point in time, your hand got well enough that you actually had to then go and have physical therapy to get use of your hand. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Now, what kind of use do you now have in your left hand?
So, what kind of use do I have in my left hand? In general, I mean, I can use it for daily activities of daily living, I guess you could say. So in that sense, I can definitely do whatever is necessary. But that being said, there are some particular things that I'm not able to do with my left hand. And so I'm sure you would like to get an example of that, just in general. And so it's, for example, right now I am making a fist right now, but it's not a completely closed fist.
Would it be fair to say that like tiny little things like putting in a contact or something might be something that might you have difficulty with in your left hand?
I'm not entirely certain because of the fact that I never use my left hand to put my contacts in, and I'm right hand dominant regardless. And so I'm not entirely sure about that, just in general, if I could do it even if my hand was completely normal. But that being said, notable things that I can't do aside from that would be the fact that I used to play a lot of bass guitar. And obviously, when playing any kind of instrument like a bass guitar, you need both of your hands to be able to actually play a musical instrument like that. And just holding down the fretboard of the bass guitar with my left hand is tremendously difficult and weak and painful.
So 2.5 years later, there's still pain in your left hand.
That is definitely true.
You also mentioned that you had a fracture or an injury to your femur. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you have to have some sort of medical treatment for your femur fracture?
So they had to do surgery for my femur. And they replaced half my femur with a titanium rod.
Was that one of the surgeries that happened when you were still at UCSD?
I think so. I followed up with the orthopedic surgeon that did the surgery for that as well.
And as a result of that injury, did you also have to go through physical therapy?
Yes.
And was that physical therapy in order to get the strength back in your leg? Is that fair to say?
Yes, it's definitely true that I definitely had to get strength back to be able to use my legs properly, use my leg properly again. But that being said, I definitely do still have associated problems with my left leg even right now.
What kind of issues?
So notably, it would be pain, in the sense that when would it be painful? The notable thing would be if I were to be going up or down, going downstairs. Upstairs is generally fine, but going downstairs is painful, and running is always painful.
You're able to run on your leg with the half of it being titanium?
I'm capable of running as long as I'm willing to tolerate the pain. So if necessary, I can run, but I'm not going to with the pain.
And is the pain that you have in your leg, is that still something that you have to get treatment for, or additional therapy or anything like that?
No.
You mentioned that you have a traumatic brain injury, is that right?
Right.
What is the nature of your injury besides the I'm going to say this, no, not. Can I call it HH for short?
Sure.
Besides the injury that affects your vision, what other impact does this traumatic brain injury have?
Specifically, cognition. And to give you a little bit more detail, specifically, being able to remember, and memory is definitely a very significant component that has been injured. And so that being said, obviously I am in medical school, and the amount of information that I need to learn is going to be a very large amount, and so that is definitely significantly more challenging since the accident.
You have problems remembering things, is that fair?
Yes.
Just to, not to simplify it in a disrespectful way, but if we're boiling it down to what impact this crash had on your world.
Memory is definitely a significant portion.
And is there anything that you're going to be able to do to get that back?
I don't think so.
Now, when you were from UCSD to the rehabilitation center to home, when you got home, were you ambulatory? Were you able to move around? Or what were things like when you first got home?
When I first got home, I think, yeah, I was ambulatory.
You were?
Yeah.
Did you have to move around with crutches or anything because of the injury to your femur?
I don't think so. I can't remember exactly though.
So this crash happened on May the 15th, in the early morning hours of May the 16th, 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know when you started physical therapy?
When I started physical therapy, I thought I had started, starting at the rehabilitation center was when I started, and then I definitely continued outpatient physical therapy for at least a year, I think.
are you still having to undergo any sort of treatment or physical therapy for, let's say, your hand injury?
So when it comes to my hand and my thigh, femur injury, I'm not going through any kind of physical therapy at this moment in time.
What about for your HH? Is there any sort of treatment or therapy for that?
So that is definitely one of the things that I'm doing right now is working with a neuro-optometrist, and she is changing the I guess my lens specifically every approximately 3 months to see if she can progressively increase my range of vision.
And how long will you have to continue to do that?
I'm not certain.
And what about for your traumatic brain injury? Is there anything that you can do or that you're working on to increase your memory or to deal with the injury that you suffered?
I don't think that there's any notable medical treatments that I'm taking or anything like that to improve my traumatic brain injury. Ultimately, to actually be able to improve it, I basically am going back through medical school, and the struggles of going through education just in general, I think is the most beneficial to help be able to improve my cognition as much as possible. I hope I'm right about that. I'm not entirely certain though.
Before the crash, you'd gone through your first 2 years of medical school, is that correct?
Yes.
When did you actually get to apply or start to go back to medical school?
So specifically, so again, the accident happened in 2015 in May, and so I attempted to try to go back to medical school the May of 2016 first, and then I went through, 3 months of the third year, and had to quit at that moment in time because I wasn't able to tolerate it cognitively and physically, and so then I came back again on the May of 2017 to start back up again, and here I am right now. And I've continued through medical school at least since May of 2017.
Welcome back. You were just listening to testimony in the case of Jason Riley King. He is the U.S. Marine who was accused of murder in the deadly crash that killed 2 young UC San Diego medical students 2 years ago. King currently faces a number of charges, including counts for murder, gross vehicular manslaughter, and DUI, and he faces 47 years to life in prison if convicted. You were just listening to one of the surviving victims of that crash, Yuki. The judge had asked that his face not be shown on camera during the trial, just out of respect for his privacy, so that's why we weren't seeing his face. Again, this trial has been going on all week. It will continue on Tuesday after the Martin Luther King holiday. And I just want to ask Julie Rendelman before we switch topics. Julie, our law and crime trial analyst, so far in what we've seen in this trial, do you think the jury will be convinced that he's guilty of murder as opposed to just vehicular manslaughter?
I think it's a little, or I think it's still a little too early to tell. I think they always say don't judge until the end, and I'm trying not to. And so I think also the closing arguments will make a huge difference and an impact on this jury if they're effective on either side.
Absolutely, for sure. And I think the trial is expected to last about 3 weeks, so we'll see how it goes. There is the holiday on Monday and so forth. But let's switch gears completely now and talk about a case in Michigan against Larry Nasser. He is the former Michigan State doctor and the doctor for Team USA Gymnastics, who we have recently heard about in the news after Olympian famous gymnasts like Ali Raisman, Kayla Maroney, Gabby Douglas came forward and say this doctor on Team USA sexually abused them under the pretense of doing examinations and treating them. It's a rather disturbing story, but this week the news is the Attorney General in this case filed paperwork asking that Nasser get 40 to 125 years for this crime. He did plead guilty to 10 counts of sexual abuse. 125 apparently represents 1 year for every woman who reported being sexually abused by Nasser, though it's my understanding that there were many more women, possibly as many as 150 who have come forward. Just want to read a quote from the Assistant Attorney General on this case, who wrote in her filing that Nasser preyed upon unknowing victims at every turn and at every opportunity, including at USA Gymnastics training facilities. Now, Nasser has already been convicted on child pornography charges, is already facing 60 years behind jail. So this sentencing memorandum, this heavy sentence that prosecutors are asking for, is it really just more symbolic at this point? Because we already know this guy's in jail the next 60 years, or you know, maybe a little less with good behavior.
Right, except, you know, there's an appeal going on with regards to the 60-year sentence.
Right.
And so you never know what's going to happen with that. And so, you know, yes, it's symbolic, but I also think, you know, this guy has been doing what he's been doing for God knows how many years, and has been getting away with it for all these years. And so, you know, look, I mean, whether it's 60 years, or I'm not sure how old he is at this point, but the likelihood of him getting out of jail, you know, whether it's another 60 years or another 100 years, is very unlikely.
Right.
So any sentence, you know, at this stage means that it's going to be a life sentence.
So Nasser has pled guilty. He's awaiting sentencing that is expected to happen next week. But what about the implications for both USA Gymnastics, which employed Nasser for many years as the team doctor for these Olympian athletes and these elite gymnasts, and also Michigan State? Let's first talk about USA Gymnastics, because it was just a couple of weeks ago that Aly Raisman, Olympic gold medalist, headed up the team, her gymnastics team in a former Olympics, came forward, sat down with 60 Minutes, and broke her silence on this and said, for years, she was abused by this doctor. At the time, she just thought it was part of the treatment. They were told to just go along with whatever he said, to trust him. But obviously, you know, she realized that maybe she was young and naive and that he was doing something wrong. She's come forward with her story. And she's been really vocal this week on Twitter, actually, coming out against USA Gymnastics. And I want to put up a tweet we have of hers where she says, "Stop victim shaming. Your statements are hurtful. If you did not believe that I and others were abused, then why pressure manipulate us?" She's tweeting at USA Gymnastics. "We were molested by a monster you enabled to thrive for decades. You are 100% responsible because it was mandatory for the athletes to get treatment by Nasser." So, I mean, how much of a case do these women have against USA Gymnastics for enabling this, as Aly Raisman says?
You know, look, this is a little different than what we talked about with the Cosby case, because I think the Me Too movement, you know, does have an impact here. Now, not to say that there haven't been claims against universities and, you know, public officials, and, you know, in terms of, you know, like years of abuse, this definitely got some headway because of not only what he had done, but also kind of the environment that it's in. I think the problem for USA Gymnastics is that what they knew at the time that all this was going on, and what they were sweeping under the rug, because there seems to be allegations that they were, you know, when individuals came forward, potentially they were told to kind of keep it silent, not to go to the police, that they would handle it internally. And obviously their handling of it internally means that, you know, after all these years, in 2017, for the first time, he's being convicted of child porn.
And he was continued to stay on the staff. And he was allowed to stay on staff and continue to treat patients. This week, another development in this case is that an elite gymnast named Maggie Nichols came forward. She said she reported the abuse by Nasser back in 2015 to USA Gymnastics. They told her they investigated it, and they didn't find any grounds for sexual abuse. They didn't find her claims credible. And I think when Aly Raisman is making her statements on Twitter, you know, that's what she's referring to when she says stop victim shaming, because there's, you know, really saying that this other athlete's credibility is in question.
Right, and here's the thing, I want to be very careful that not every time an individual comes forward with a sexual allegation claim against an individual is that person telling the truth. We have to be objective when anytime anyone makes an accusation. We can't just assume because someone makes an accusation that it's true. You must always question an individual's credibility and whether or not they have a motive. The problem here, and again, I don't know that we even have touched what we're going to find out, is I have a feeling the problem here is that we're going to find out that much more was known to them than just this individual, and at least that there was some pieces that they knew along the way that I think, quite honestly, a lawsuit will open the door to finding out much more that we don't know yet.
You know, some people might be curious if athletes like these and all of these other women, it's not just the famous Olympic athletes, there's some 150 women at least who have come forward and say he abused them, you know, whether at Michigan State or on Team Olympics. When they come forward and they say, okay, we're going to sue USA Gymnastics now or Michigan State because there are a number of women who said they reported abuse by this doctor as far back as 20 years ago, what kind of case do they bring? Do they want to collect for emotional distress? What sort of damages are asked for, and what can we expect if a case is filed against USA Gymnastics?
It depends. Look, I mean, sometimes people sue not for money. I mean, that's not usually the way people go about it. But you saw Taylor Swift recently. I know she has a lot of money, so it didn't matter. But when she sued the individual that had, touched her buttocks and defamed her, she sued for $1 because she wanted to be heard. And sometimes individuals sue for money, but sometimes they sue because they want to be heard and they want to right a wrong. But if this is what it is and the allegations are accurate, they're looking at a lot of money, not just because, for the potential of, whatever crime, whatever civil suit is coming out and whatever potential liability they have, but this is lawyers that are going back 20 years, if not more, that are going to have to pull and do discovery on so many levels. So I think that they are in for a major problem. I mean, this happens and has happened we've heard at schools before, at private schools, and by the way, it doesn't behoove them in terms of going forward. The Olympics are considered something that everyone watches, everyone enjoys watching. We always watched growing up, and so it really puts a damper on kind of the whole idea of what the Olympics is supposed to represent.
Yeah, I mean, the USA Olympic team got rid of one of their top executives in the wake of this scandal, if we can call it that. But
Right.
Ali Raisman says in another tweet, the problem is bigger than Penny. Penny is the president of the organization who stepped down. Bigger than Penny and Nasser, the system has to change so that athletes are safe and enablers need to be held accountable, which is something we're hearing so much about. Enablers, who are the people who knew about it, whether it was in Harvey Weinstein's office, whether it was on the gymnastics team, right? And can those enablers be held accountable in any legal way?
It depends. It depends on, again, you have to prove certain things. Simply because someone worked at an agency and it doesn't automatically mean that they're responsible. It depends on what they knew and what they did or didn't do about it. And so I don't know the details of the specific woman that, was asked to leave. Obviously, I think that there's much more than just her that has had an impact in regards to allowing this individual to stay for such a long period of time and to kind of stay unquestioned and to continue to treat young girls, because remember, these gymnastics, some of these kids are like 11, 12 years old. And so he was continuing to treat them unregulated. So it's kind of terrifying to think as a parent putting your child in that position, let alone, people like Ali Reisman that are old enough now to kind of be able to speak up for themselves.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is amazing to me that over several decades, there could be so many women who say that they were victims and that in 2017, it didn't come to light until now or until last year, I guess. Do how much is this, you touched on this before, but the fact that we are now in the midst of this Me Too movement, and obviously the case against Nasser was in progress before this happened, but how much, is this just adding pressure for USA Olympic gymnastics team, for Michigan State? And by the way, Michigan State set up a $10 million fund to assist women and girls who have said that Nasser abused them. And, as we're talking about possible cases against Team USA Gymnastics and the school, already they're the subject of scores of lawsuits from women and girls claiming that these organizations didn't do enough to protect them.
I mean, look, I think for a while some places have woken up a little bit. We hear about universities that are, getting rid of fraternities who do any type of hazing or sexual harassment or anything like that. So, we want to think that they have woken up to a degree. I think the one thing about the movement is that if they haven't woken up, they will wake up because, policies, obviously, whether it comes to the gymnastics organization or any of these organizations, are going to have to be in place to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. And we've heard about it for years. We've heard about private schools where they have to pay out millions of dollars for, a teacher that abused children. We've heard about this, whether it be, in various, religious sects where, there have been money that has been paid over the years from years ago. So it exists and money gets paid, but I definitely think there is momentum right now. And while it's going, I think this is not a very good time for USA Gymnastics.
Yeah, that is for sure. Well, again, the sentencing for Larry Nasser is scheduled for sometime next week, and prosecutors in Michigan filed a memorandum this week asking he be sentenced between 40 and 125 years in prison. That 125 number representing the number of women, or really a low estimate of the number of women that have come forward claiming that Nasser sexually abused them. I want to switch gears again to another case we'll be looking at next week, and that is the case of Billy Woodward out of Titusville, Florida. He is accused of murdering several of his neighbors, and what is interesting in this case is it took place in Florida. As I said, this was Labor Day weekend 2012, and the question here is, was he standing his ground, because Florida is a state that has your stand your ground law, or was he seeking revenge on neighbors who were giving him a hard time? First, I want to play a little clip previewing the case, which should get started next week.
Labor Day weekend 2012. What should be barbecues, fun, and celebrating turned into murder. William Woodward of Titusville, Florida is accused of shooting and killing 2 neighbors and injuring a third. And it was all captured on surveillance footage. The man who prosecutors say dressed in camouflage and hid in the bushes for this surprise attack is now claiming self-defense. His defense attorneys say Woodward was provoked for months and that the community supports his actions. And that's not all. Reports indicate that Woodward, who is a war veteran, may suffer from PTSD and a brain injury. Stakes are high in this case as Woodward could face the death penalty.
So yes, that is a death penalty case for William Woodward, 49 years old, in Titusville, Florida, who is accused of killing his neighbors Gary Lee Hembry and Roger Piccior outside of his home back in Labor Day 2010. So I mentioned this is a stand your ground case. Woodward's attorneys tried to argue in a pretrial hearing when they asked the judge to throw out this case that he was merely standing his ground and protecting himself and his family. The judge didn't buy it then. The trial is going forward, and his defense attorneys have said they will use the same line of argument that they used in that pretrial hearing. Will it work?
I don't know. This is an interesting case, and I think there's so many things going on. I don't think this is a pure stand your ground case, and I say that because nobody would necessarily argue that someone who gets into camouflage, when the violence is not happening from the other side, basically approaches them, in the darkness and fires at them, fires point blank range at several of them, would constitute the stand your ground argument. But there are factors kind of going on in regards to this case, including support from a lot of the community, a lot of the neighbors who say that they were terrified for their life and they were terrified by whatever these victims and their family were doing. One of the interesting things that I know you're going to see, and we're going to see throughout this trial, is we're going to hear the prosecutor say again and again to the various witnesses, I'm willing to bet you, that come in and say, I was terrified for my life, I was terrified for my life. The question they're going to ask is, did you take a gun, go over to your neighbor's house and fire at them? And they're going to do that again and again because they're going to question the reasonableness of his actions.
Right, because why didn't he call the police if he thought something was going to happen?
Right, which by the way, again goes into kind of what was going on and kind of the mess that was going on, because the police had been called numerous times.
Right.
And they had gone for orders of protection, and it did seem that the legal system was not helping them. And so, look, sometimes there's not a pure stand your ground. Sometimes a jury just nullifies and says, you know what, it's not really stand your ground, but we kind of understand where he's coming from. And look, there's also an argument of a manslaughter case at the end of the day. So I think there's several options. I, for one, though, have to say, and I don't know if I'm taking a position that's against what other people think, I'm shocked that this is a death penalty case.
I was going to ask you that. I mean, how unusual is this? I mean, obviously Florida, a death penalty state, but this is a man, and I just want to recount some of the details which you mentioned. There was an ongoing feud going on between the Woodwards and their neighbors over a number of small issues that seemed to escalate and escalate, and there was name calling, and there were very nasty things said to another. You mentioned they had been in court filing orders of protection against each other, and then on Labor Day 2012, Billy Woodward has described that in his pretrial hearing, I believe, that he heard something happening at the neighbors. He saw something like, were they going to light something on fire? He thought, are they going to get a gun and shoot me? And so he dressed up in camouflage, and I did forget to mention, he is a veteran. He dressed up in camouflage. He hid in his bushes and then came out and ambushed these neighbors, shot 3 of them and shot 2 of them dead. So why would it not be a death penalty case? Let's just start from that perspective, because he does admit to killing 2 people.
Look, I mean, we can sit and just debate, whether the death penalty should exist or not. But when it comes to cases like this, where we're even sitting and having these discussions as to whether it should be murder or manslaughter, whether it should be stand your ground, whether this is an individual that's suffering from some type of PTSD at the time this is happening. When we talk about all those things, we start to say, well, then why on earth are we talking about death penalty? Death penalty is supposed to be saved for the individual that is the most egregious individual, and that the crime is the most egregious. I am not taking for 1 second away from the fact that people died, and it's absolutely tragic. But when we talk about where the death penalty should fit, I'm not sure that this is the case. And again, by the way, I haven't seen the case. So I may hear it and feel very differently at the end.
None of us have heard the case yet.
But from the onset, I get the sense. And look, keep in mind, they had asked for the death penalty. It had gone, the judge had taken it off the table. It had gone to appeal, and it's back. And so I just start to wonder, and I do think that does sometimes cloud the issues about what this case is really about when you start bringing the death penalty into it.
It's a good point. I want to talk about the fact that Woodward's attorneys have brought up before, he is a veteran, he did get dressed in his camouflage, he made statements feeling like in that moment he was back on the battlefield, and they have argued that he has PTSD and even possibly some brain damage maybe from his time serving. What part will that play, if any?
I think that plays more to a manslaughter than it plays to, the stand your ground argument.
Right, which is why I guess his attorneys would bring it up.
Right, but it's also, it can sometimes create some confusion for the jury. When you're the defense attorney, you have to be careful when you're introducing more than one theory, because you don't want to let the jury think for a second, wait, which theory is he going with? Is he not
just throwing them
is he
all
not being
against the
honest
wall
with me? Does he just want me to pick one? And so you really have to be very delicate in terms of how you pull in the PTSD, how it relates, and how you get the jury to understand, well, it is stand your ground for these reasons, and kind of at the end say, but we do know for, without question that it's manslaughter. Whatever it is, if they're not going to buy the stand your ground, then what are they going to buy? Because if they don't buy your ground, then the argument becomes, well, is it just murder? And so you want to make sure as the defense attorney that you got a backup plan, because you don't want him convicted of that.
Right. The jury selection has been going on all week. They have questioned at least 160 jurors. Is that an unusually high number? Is that average for a murder case like this?
I think when you're dealing with death penalty, you're going to have a much more difficult time finding a jury. You're also in a smaller community where a lot of people are going to not just know things about this case, but have strong opinions about this case. And so I think it's going to be hard pressed to find people. I think that they stayed, I don't believe they changed venue. Maybe I'm getting this wrong. But even if it's a nearby area, people are going to know a lot about this case, have strong opinions, and you got to make sure you have a fair jury for both sides. So I think 160 is actually not too bad, and hopefully the judge and the prosecutor and the defense are asking the right questions to kind of get rid of those people who can't be fair to both sides.
Because this is a stand your ground case, and there has been so much attention on these cases because of the George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin case, does this have bigger implications? Plus the fact that it's a death penalty case. If a jury sides with him and his defense team that he did stand his ground, what does that do?
I don't know that it does, and look, maybe I'm being naive. I think Zimmerman had many bigger implications because a young black man was killed, and a lot of people believe, many rightfully so, that he was absolutely innocent and there was no reason for him to die that day. I think this is a little different because this really was a battle that was going on between them. And many people, if you accept some of what you hear is going to potentially be testified to, is that the individuals, at least from the victim's home. Not necessarily the victims, but were, doing things that indicated to the defendant and his family that they were going to be not just saying nasty things, but were going to risk, threaten violence on them.
Right.
And so that changes it a bit. So, when you have someone, pointing even if it's a finger and going, you're going to die or anything like that, it starts to raise the specter for what kind of the fear is. And so I don't think that this is going to have kind of the ramifications that it would, in a case like Zimmerman.
Well, thanks for your insights in that. I want to talk about another, well, first let me just say that William Woodward's trial again was in jury selection this week. 160 jurors or so have been questioned so far, and we are expecting the trial to get underway next week, and we will be covering it here at Law and Crime, gavel to gavel, as they say. I want to move on to another hot topic in the news right now that has to do with our president, of course.